Where do Singaporeans come from? It's a question that sounds simple until you try to answer it. This small island at the tip of the Malay Peninsula is home to just over 5 million people today. Yet, their roots stretch across oceans and centuries. Singapore's story is not the tale of one people, but of many. In this video, we'll explore how a fishing village became a global hub, how waves of migrants built its culture, and how all of that came together to create the modern Singaporean identity. This is the story of the origin of Singapore, and where Singaporeans truly come from. Chapter 1. What was Singapore before it was Singapore? Before there were glittering skyscrapers, superhighways, and the Marina Bay sands, Singapore was simply an island. Archaeological evidence shows that people have lived in this region for at least 1,000 years. These early inhabitants were mostly Malay-speaking coastal communities. They fished in the surrounding waters, built wooden boats, and traded with passing sailors. Life was simple, but this was already a place of connection. By the 13th century, this island was part of the Srivijaya Empire, a powerful maritime kingdom that controlled trade across much of Southeast Asia. Back then, it wasn't called Singapore. It was known as Temasek, which means sea town in Old Javanese. Temasek's location was no accident. It sat along the busy trade route linking China, India, and the Middle East. This meant that Chinese junks, Indian dhows, and Arab trading ships regularly anchored here. Goods like spices, ceramics, textiles, and gold changed hands, and ideas and cultures were exchanged right alongside them. Temasek was small, but its role was big. It was a stopover, a marketplace, and a safe harbor. Yet it wasn't always peaceful. Control of the island shifted between kingdoms, and like all ports of the time, it was vulnerable to piracy and invasion. Still, this early chapter set the stage for what Singapore would become, a crossroads of the world. Chapter 2. How did a lion give Singapore its name? One of the most famous stories about Singapore's beginnings isn't found in archaeology, it's found in legend. The tale comes from the Malay Annals, a historical record written in the 15th century. According to this account, a Sumatran prince named San Mila Utama was sailing in the region during the 13th century when a storm forced him to land on this island. As he explored the coastline, he saw a strange animal moving through the jungle. It had a golden brown coat, a strong build, and a majestic mane. His advisors told him it was a lion. Taking it as a sign of power and good fortune, he decided to settle there. He named the place Singapura, from the Sanskrit Sima, lion, and Pura, city. The name meant the Lion City. Of course, there's one problem. Lions have never lived in Southeast Asia. Historians think he likely saw a tiger, which still roamed the Malay Peninsula at the time. But names are more than just facts. They're symbols. The Lion City gave the island an identity tied to courage, strength, and ambition. By the 14th century, Singapura was a thriving port, busy with traders from China, India, and the Malay world. But its success also drew enemies. The city faced attacks from the Siamese and later from the powerful Majapahit Empire of Java. Eventually, it was defeated and fell into decline. But the name Singapura survived, carrying its legend forward through the centuries. Chapter 3. How did the British turn a quiet island into a global port? By the late 18th century, Singapore was little more than a small Malay fishing village, surrounded by mangroves and dense jungle. But its location, right at the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula, had not gone unnoticed. In 1819, Sir Stamford Raffles, a representative of the British East India Company, arrived on the island. The British were searching for a new trading base to challenge Dutch dominance in the region. Raffles saw immediately what Temasek, now under the Johor Sultanate, could offer: a deep harbor, fresh water, and a perfect spot along the busy China-India trade route. Working with local Malay rulers, Raffles signed a treaty that allowed the British to establish a settlement. Unlike other ports that taxed goods heavily, Singapore was declared a free port. Traders from any nation could come, sell, and buy without paying customs duties. The result was explosive. In just a few years, Singapore transformed from a sleepy village into one of the busiest ports in Asia. Sailing ships from Britain, China, India, the Malay archipelago, Arabia, and Europe crowded the harbor. Markets overflowed with silk, spices, tea, opium, and textiles. And with the trade came people, thousands of migrants seeking opportunity. From this point onward, Singapore's population began to grow rapidly. This would set the stage for the waves of migration that shaped not just its economy, but the very identity of its people. Chapter 4. Why did so many Chinese settle in Singapore? When Singapore became a British free port in 1819, one group in particular began arriving in huge numbers, the Chinese. But why did they come, and why did they stay? In the 19th and early 20th centuries, southern China faced hardship on many fronts: poverty, famine, political instability, and even civil wars. For young men in provinces like Fujian and Guangdong, opportunities were scarce. Letters from earlier migrants spoke of work and better wages in the southern seas, or Nanyang. Singapore quickly became one of the most popular destinations. Many came as coolies, manual laborers who toiled in tin mines, plantations, and docks. Others became rickshaw pullers, carpenters, boatmen, or hawkers. Life was tough, but even low wages here could be higher than in China. New arrivals often joined clan associations, community groups based on dialect or home province. These associations provided housing, helped find jobs, and even offered loans. Dialect groups such as Hokkien, Teochew, Cantonese, Hakka, and Hainanese each formed their own neighborhoods, temples, and businesses. Over time, the Chinese community became central to Singapore's growth. They dominated retail trade, banking, and shipping, and also brought with them rich traditions, from Chinese New Year celebrations to the art of street hawker cooking. By the early 20th century, the Chinese were the largest ethnic group in Singapore, shaping much of the island's culture, economy, and identity, a role they still hold today. Chapter 5. Who are the Malays of Singapore? Before the British arrived, before the bustling port, and even before the name Singapore was widely used, the island was part of the Johor Sultanate. The people who lived here then, and for centuries before, were the Malays. The Malays are considered the indigenous people of Singapore. Their roots are deeply tied to the surrounding Malay archipelago, stretching across modern-day Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, and southern Thailand. Traditionally, Malays lived along the coasts and riverbanks. They were skilled fishermen, boat builders, and traders. Small villages, known as kampongs, dotted the shoreline, with houses built on stilts above the water. Daily life revolved around the sea, community gatherings, and Islamic traditions. Even as waves of migrants from China, India, and Europe arrived in the 19th century, Malay culture remained deeply influential. The Malay language served as the region's lingua franca for centuries, allowing traders from different backgrounds to communicate. Many place names we know today, Bedok, Geylang, Kalan, Toa Payoh, come from Malay words. The Malays also shaped Singapore's food, music, and crafts. Dishes like satay, nasi lemak, and mee rebus are now loved by all Singaporeans. Traditional arts such as silat, martial arts, and kompang, drumming, continue to be performed at community and national events. Today, Malays form about 13–15% of Singapore's population. They carry forward a heritage that predates the city's colonial history, a reminder that Singapore's story began long before the British ever set foot on its shores. Chapter 6. How did Indians become part of Singapore's story? Indian migration to Singapore didn't happen all at once. It came in waves, each with its own reasons and stories. The first major arrivals came in the early 19th century with the British. Many were sepoys, Indian soldiers serving in the colonial army, brought in to defend the new settlement. Alongside them came administrators, clerks, and skilled workers from different parts of India. By the mid-19th century, Indian traders began arriving in larger numbers, especially Tamils from South India. They set up textile shops, spice businesses, and goldsmith stores. Some became moneylenders, while others worked as dock laborers or bullock cart drivers, moving goods between warehouses and the port. Religious and cultural life grew alongside the community. Hindu temples, Muslim mosques, and Sikh gurdwaras were built, often becoming not just places of worship but community centers. One of the most famous landmarks, the Sri Mariamman Temple in Chinatown, dates back to 1827 and is Singapore's oldest Hindu temple. Over time, Indians contributed richly to Singapore's multicultural identity, bringing festivals like Deepavali and Thaipusam, introducing dishes like roti prata and fish curry, and influencing the island's music and dance traditions. Today, Indians make up about 9% of Singapore's population. Their story here reflects resilience, enterprise, and a deep sense of community, qualities that help them integrate into the fabric of Singaporean life while preserving their unique heritage. Chapter 7. Who are the Eurasians of Singapore? Among Singapore's communities, the Eurasians are one of the smallest in number, but among the most distinctive in culture. So, who are they, and how did they come to be here? Eurasians trace their ancestry to centuries of intermarriage between Europeans and Asians during the colonial era. Many have roots in Portuguese Malacca, Dutch Java, or British India. Others are descendants of European traders, soldiers, or administrators who married local women from the Malay archipelago, China, or India. When Singapore became a British settlement in 1819, Eurasians were among the early arrivals. They often spoke English or Portuguese at home and were usually well educated by the standards of the time. Many worked as teachers, civil servants, journalists, and musicians, serving as a bridge between European colonial authorities and the diverse local communities. Culturally, the Eurasian identity is a unique blend. The Kristang language, a Portuguese-based Creole, survives among some families. Eurasian cuisine is famous for dishes like devil's curry, suji cake, and shepherd's pie with Asian twists. Their music, often lively and rhythmic, reflects a mix of Western instruments with local melodies. Despite their small numbers, Eurasians have made outsized contributions to Singapore's society, from sports to politics and the arts. Their story is one of adaptation, embracing both their Asian and European heritage and carving a space for themselves in a city shaped by many cultures. Chapter 8. How did war change Singapore forever? The early 20th century was a time of growth for Singapore, but everything changed in February 1942. The Second World War had reached Southeast Asia, and the Japanese army swept down the Malay Peninsula with shocking speed. The British had long believed that Singapore was an impregnable fortress, but in reality, its defenses were aimed at sea, not land. When Japanese forces attacked from the north, Singapore's defenses crumbled. On the 15th of February 1942, the British surrendered in what Winston Churchill would later call the worst disaster in British military history. The next 3 years, the Japanese occupation, were some of the darkest in Singapore's history. The island was renamed Sionanto, meaning light of the south in Japanese, but for most residents it was a time of fear, hunger, and hardship. Food was scarce, inflation soared, and strict curfews were enforced. One of the most horrific episodes was the Suk Ching massacre, where thousands of Chinese men suspected of anti-Japanese sentiment were executed. The occupation left deep scars, especially among those who lived through it. When the war ended in 1945 and the British returned, Singaporeans were changed. The trust in colonial protection had been shattered. For many, the occupation sparked a new determination. Singapore could not simply rely on others for its survival. The seeds of independence and the idea of a united Singaporean identity had been planted in the ashes of war. After the war, the push for self-government grew. In 1959, Singapore gained internal self-rule. In 1963, it briefly joined Malaysia, but political tensions led to separation in 1965. On the 9th of August 1965, Singapore became an independent nation. It was a fragile beginning, a tiny island with no natural resources, surrounded by uncertainty. But Singaporeans, regardless of whether their ancestors came from China, India, or the Malay world, began to see themselves as one people. Chapter 10. How did Singaporeans build a shared identity? When Singapore became independent in 1965, it faced a unique challenge. Its people came from many different ethnic, cultural, and religious backgrounds. How could such diversity be shaped into a single, united nation? The government knew that unity couldn't be left to chance. Policies were introduced to promote racial harmony, equality, and mutual respect. Public housing estates were planned so that Chinese, Malays, Indians, and Eurasians would live side by side, avoiding ethnic enclaves that could divide the city. Language played a key role. English became the common working language, helping people of different mother tongues communicate. At the same time, bilingual education ensured that each community could keep its heritage alive by learning its own mother tongue. Mandarin, Malay, or Tamil, shared spaces like hawker centers became everyday meeting points where cultures blended over food. Here, you could have Chinese char kway teow for breakfast, Malay nasi lemak for lunch, and Indian roti prata for supper, all without leaving your neighborhood. National celebrations also brought people together. Festivals from all communities, Chinese New Year, Hari Raya Aidilfitri, Deepavali, and Christmas, became part of the country's shared calendar, celebrated by everyone regardless of background. Over time, these deliberate efforts turned diversity from a challenge into a strength. Being Singaporean came to mean more than just where your grandparents came from. It meant sharing a commitment to harmony, hard work, and the belief that this small island could achieve big dreams. So, where do Singaporeans come from? Some have ancestors who lived here for centuries. Others have grandparents who stepped off a ship just decades ago. A growing number are the children of mixed marriages with roots in multiple cultures. What makes a Singaporean is not just ancestry, it's a shared sense of belonging to this small, determined, extraordinary nation. Singaporeans come from everywhere, but they all call this island home. Singapore's history is the story of connection, of people drawn here by the promise of trade, safety, or a better life, of cultures that met, mixed, and made something entirely new. In the end, Singaporeans come from the same place we all do, the hope for a better tomorrow.